Well, I'd like to welcome all of you here to the Institute of Noetic Sciences, and thank you to the staff and people here for letting us use this facility. Beautiful grounds, it's wonderful being up here again, and it's really a very special place, the Earthrise retreat here at IONS. I also want to thank all the staff who are volunteering. These are all volunteer people. Thank all of you, Lyra, Ricky, Justice, and everyone who's out there helping us with the program today. And I'd like to also recognize and thank Lance and Christina, who are film crew here, who are doing our next feature film, which will be Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, Consciousness, Contact, and the Human Future. So that should be done in about a year and released globally. So that's very exciting. They've just gotten engaged, and we just got back off the mountain from Mount Shasta last night, and amazing experiences there, which we'll go into a little bit. I was here I can't remember when, it was in the 1990s, and a man that founded the Institute of Noetic Sciences, Edgar Mitchell, I got to know over the years, and I was sort of the person who brought him into this subject of the interstellar question. And he actually, I invited him to come with me to the Pentagon in 1997, in the spring of that year, when we briefed the head of intelligence and Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Tom Wilson. So Dr. Mitchell was there with me, as were some of my military advisors and witnesses all the way back from the Eisenhower era to the current period as of that date. And it was really exciting to introduce Dr. Mitchell to this subject, since he was the sixth man to walk on the moon, which in sort of full circle synchronicity, my oldest uncle worked on the lunar module that landed on the moon. That was the vehicle that took the astronauts there in the 60s and early 70s. So it was really a wonderful time, interesting era, and we think of Edgar in the worlds of light, which is now he's exploring all of it without the encumbrance of the physical cage, which is quite beautiful as well to contemplate. So what we're going to be doing today is to go through the structure of the cosmos, how that relates to higher states of consciousness and the development of consciousness, and then the correlation of those states of consciousness with levels of civilization that we have contact with at this point, and increasing levels of contact through the Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind initiative, which is the initiative to make peaceful contact with these civilizations, utilizing the science of consciousness and a set of protocols that sort of got developed when I was 18 years old and had a contact experience up in the mountains of North Carolina back in those days. So what we want to do is go through this very methodically. I've created some graphs for you guys, which I hope will be useful learning tools to understand this, because it'll seem overwhelming initially, but we'll go back over it as much as we can. We have 4 hours today here. And I also want to welcome, by the way, all the folks who are coming in by webinar. There are a few thousand people will be watching by webinar today who can't be here personally. So welcome. So if we can go to the first slide, and this is, I came up with this. It's very hard to put into a two-dimensional format the holographic conscious universe, but this is an attempt. And what you'll see is in the very center is this pure consciousness, inner unbounded state that is at the baseline field consciousness that is non-local, omnipresent, and which has been scientifically shown to be omnipresent, non-local. And this work that's been done by Dr. John at Princeton with the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Lab. Dean Radin has done a lot of pioneering work in consciousness, who's now here at Noetic Sciences. there has been a growing body of science that shows that the conscious field itself is not bound by space, time, brainwave activity, the body, et cetera, and so on, and in fact can affect mechanical systems. You can put your thought on a random number generator to generate more zeros than ones, or vice versa, and it'll do that. Right before 9/11, there was a big spike collectively on a precognitive level of collective unconscious that occurred just before that event took place. You may know about that research. So people often connect through consciousness as it relates to their individuality. This is the transpersonal, transcendent level of consciousness that is the baseline consciousness that is not bound by space, time, individuality, et cetera, and so on. And yet, what's interesting about the nature of this inner unbounded state is that that state of consciousness is present equally at every point in space and time. It can't be divided up. It's an indivisible state. And so all of you right now who are hearing my voice, you're sitting awake in your bodies, presumably, here, present. That conscious mind that is allowing you to be aware and awake and sentient is, let's look at it this way, an ray of that infinite unbounded field that we're identifying with ourselves. But the reality of it is that it is always unbounded. So the experience of that state of unboundedness has been called samadhi or nirvana, or in Christian early times, the beatific state, et cetera, and so on. However, it's actually always operative. And it's operative whether we acknowledge it or not. And that's the wellspring of intuition and people who have precognitive dreams. That's because in the dream state, you're a little more released from linear space-time, and you can go into a state which we'll call the astral visual state and see an event that'll happen the next day or the next year. So the only reason any of that's possible is the nature of the spirit of consciousness in its non-local aspect. But just remember, it's an aspect that's there in its fullness at every point in space and time, within all space and time and matter, and is not bound. So it's, in a sense, a paradox. It's omnipresent and unbounded, and yet it's present in its fullness at every point in space and time, and therefore it's accessible at every point in space and time. Does this make sense? Have I lost people yet? I hope not. Most of you are meditators and understand consciousness pretty well, so that part of it is really important to realize. And this is why when they've done studies, and this was done back and published in mainstream physics journals, that they could put a photon down a beam, a photon beam, and the person who ran the experiment would think to change the opening the photon was going to go through, and it would precognitively change. Photons. So the idea here is that everything has a connection to consciousness, and from consciousness, thought and intent. Now, when we're talking about just the natural order of things, this has been known by shamans and mystics and people throughout human history. What we're now finding in scientific research is these are reproducible engineering studies that can be done, like Dr. John started at the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Lab, and others have done with biological systems, Bruce Lipton and others. But the key thing is to understand, is don't make it complicated, because you're awake right now. If you're aware, if you can become aware of that awareness, it's sort of a Zen process to subtract all the phenomenon of your thoughts, your perceptions, your body. It's like all, not this, remove all the ephemera, all the passing perceptions, thought, even your individuality, and just reflect on the state of being, consciousness. That's all it is. It's really all it is. Now, having that experience is beautiful and enlightening and liberating and blissful and all of that. And that's why meditation techniques exist. But just remember, those are techniques. That's not the end. It's a means to the end. But this is always there. So once we understand that we are not limited any individual in space or time, but there's a perfect field of unbounded consciousness that can be accessed, and that's no matter what we're doing, then it's incredibly liberating and empowering, and that's the whole process of self-actualization. And we could go on all day about that, but you know, and what the techniques are and the kinds of experiences, and we'll touch on that in a moment. Now, as the unbounded, let's call it the unbounded field of absolute pure consciousness that's undifferentiated, begins to differentiate, there are phases or aspects of it as it does that. The first of which is the thought, the sound component of thought, which, by the way, a mantra is simply the sound component of a thought, or chanting, or what have you. And the sound component of a thought at the level of unbounded, coming from that first emanation from the field or the plane of the absolute, if you wish to look at it that way, has been called at various things the primal thought. And it has within it the tonality and thought essence of everything that exists in the cosmos, whether it is physical, whether it is in the spirit world, or astral, we'll get into this in a moment. All of that emanates, and this is why, you know, of course, it gets turned into sort of metaphors and allegories. In the beginning, there was the Word, and the Word was with God, et cetera, and so on. The Word doesn't mean a word like water bottle. Apologize for using these plastic bottles. We should have something else. Anyway, but nevertheless, that is the key thing to understand, is that the undifferentiated, unbounded mind has to have step-down transformers, let's call it, phases of manifestation all the way to the entire cosmos, galaxies, star systems, your body, yourselves. So that first emanation, which is it can be experienced, is this primal thought, causal tonality. That it then differentiates further. You see that the arrows are going both ways for a reason, because it can come from in or out, or from the external in terms of an experience. Is that there's the causal thought resonant tonality realm that's unique to each created thing, and that's where every blade of grass and every grain of sand and every body and every individual has its own tonality, music, essence, that is more fundamental, although this sounds very abstract, as a thought essence, that it has tonality associated with it that even precedes so-called the body of light, the astral body that you might experience in a lucid dream or an astral projection or a near-death experience. We'll get to this in a moment. None of this is foreign, because everyone's experienced this at some point in their life, or when you pass away, you will. So I'm giving you a glimpse of your future, because none of us make it out of this world alive. Trust me, as an emergency doctor. So you may think you do. We're born, we live, and we pass on. But so you'll experience that. Now, many people do not experientially experience this, and this, or the next one. This next phase, let's call it, is the emanation of the pure light form. So it's been called mystically the most great light. And some would say it would be the expressed aspect that one could see of the creator being, if you will. And the great light you see when you pass away and have a near-death experience. So that first emanation is beautiful. Those of us how many people had a near-death experience? I had a very detailed one, which we'll get into if you wish. So that emanation of the pure light form is, if you will, corollary to the primal thought, the essence of the primal thought that has within it the complexity and tonality of an infinite number of expressions. In a similar like way, all forms that are visual are contained within the emanation of that most pure light being. or that expression of the unbounded. Then you get into more specific elaborations and expressions of that state, which would be, for example, the divine avatars that have been variously identified through history, whether it's Christ or Buddha or Krishna, etc. The celestial realm, angelic, astral, worlds of light, the afterlife, and other dimensions. Now, there are other dimensions we'll get into in a moment, because that has a great deal to do with what we're talking about today of transdimensional interstellar civilizations. Now, when you have this, many people have experienced something at this level, where they've had a lucid dream where you're flying in the dream. How many people had a flying lucid dream in your life? Almost everybody. In reality, that's your light body that's actually going on a little trip. It's taking a little journey. Now, most people think, oh, I just had a dream. And most dreams are just that. But the really clear lucid dreams, you're awake in the dream, and often you'll be flying. It's beautiful. And you're actually utilizing this body of light that has within it your essence of your individuality, the thought expression, that's the sound component of the thought. It's been called Lesha Vidya in the Sanskrit. We'll talk about this more later, what Lesha Vidya really is. And then from there, the expression you can explore anywhere, because you're not bound by your physical body. You can go out in space, you can go over the ocean, you can go under the ocean and meet dolphins, or you can go and see an ancestor in the worlds of light, the astral. And almost all humans have experienced some aspect of this during the dream state or a deep meditative state or in the hypnagogic, going in and out of sleep, between sleep and waking states. That is interesting because I like telling this story. It's apocryphal, but it's interesting because one time I took my wife and I for our anniversary. We're going to have our 39th anniversary next month. Hard to believe. But 39 freakish years being with me. Anyway, quite a journey. We met 40 years ago this past April in Israel. But I was introduced to her in a lucid dream before I met her physically. You may know this story from Hidden Truth, Forbidden Knowledge, a book I wrote about all that. But one time we went to Costa Rica, and we were right by the ocean, beautiful Pacific coast, really beautiful area, pure nature, which is why I wanted to do this up here. In nature, you have more of the positive energy that's life-supporting for consciousness and thought. And so we were sleeping, and what she saw, she woke up, and she's not at all, let's just say, mystically inclined all that much. But she woke up and looked over, and she saw sort of this silvery grayish form sit up out of my body and fly out the window. And she's laying there, and we have 4 little kids, 4 daughters, and she's there in bed thinking, oh great, now I'm in Costa Rica, Steve is dead of a heart attack, and I'm going to be a widow, and the kids are thousands of miles away. Well, what I was experiencing is that I went into this lucid dream state and was flying over the coastline and seeing everything as if it was daytime, but even clearer, like a celestial aspect of the earth, the beauty of the ocean and the forest and of the life of Gaia. It was beautiful. And I was doing this, I was just having fun. And then I come back, and the quote, dream ends, and I feel someone's looking at me, and I look over, and she's looking at me. She says, you're back. I said, where have I gone? I didn't go anywhere. She says, you did. And she described to me what she saw. I said, oh no, I was just having a lucid flying dream. No precognition in that one. But that was just a great example, because there was a witness to the launch, let's call it, of the spirit body. And it was just a normal lucid flying dream for me. But she got to actually see it, although it was disturbing because she thought I had passed away. So you need to understand that this is not beyond the experience and the reach and the knowledge of every sentient being on Earth and in the cosmos. Not just on Earth, but universally. So in that sense, let's demystify it, own it, and say, this is normal. All of this is folded within us and is normal. Now, extraordinary levels of experience might be an afterlife, near-death experience. And okay, and an afterlife experience when you've had a near death. I know when I had mine in 1973. You may know this story. I'll just share it just because it's kind of funny. Well, not funny. It shows you the kind of character I've always been. I'm 17. I was raised in a very poor family. Had my own apartment in high school, put myself through high school, college, medical school. And, since we have no healthcare system in this country, I'm a medical doctor saying this, I was poor, had no health insurance and whatever. I got very sick. I injured my left leg. And being the jock that I was, bicycled 200 miles to the North Carolina coast with this injury. It got terribly infected. And 200 miles back. So by the time I get back, I'm really sick. And I had sepsis, which is bacterial infection of the blood. I had a hepatorenal syndrome where the kidneys and liver start shutting down and your urine looks like Coca-Cola. Now, I know all this now as an emergency doctor. At the time, I'm this 17-year-old kid going, oh, well, whatever. You know how guys are. So I'm there with like 105-degree temperature, and then poof, I code. I have a near-death experience by myself in my little room studio apartment I had in high school, and I launch. So my great love was always space and the cosmos. And I was raised a very devout atheist. The catechisms of atheism. There is no afterlife, there is no great spirit, there is no soul, you have your physical life, it's all intellect, and if it's not in a test tube, it doesn't exist, full stop. Which is the reductionist materialist model that's the dominant paradigm in our society, at least in academic, respectable circles. Okay, so I had this experience without any sort of predilection or religious training where I was supposed to meet this angry ogre known as God with a beard judging you, at the pearly gates with all that. So none of that was in my consciousness. Thank God. And so I just go straight into this state of cosmic consciousness. I stripped away even my astral body of light, and I was in this resonant tonality body, the causality, just pure thought essence, without the form of my body. And during that time, I had a meeting with two, what have been called divine avatars, sort of the highest expressions of the Godhead and Great Spirit in space. I was out amongst the cosmos and ended up having this beautiful experience and experienced all this from the pure infinite consciousness all the way to the whole cosmos, and the experience that I was that all of us are that at that deep level of experience, there is one being. We're it. We're all one being. And it was crystal clear. It was no intellectualization of it. It was a direct experience. Now here I am, this kid. I had no foundation for this really in my education or experience. I wasn't raised in a family with voodoo and crystals and meditation and saris and head turbans and ashrams and yogis or anything like that. I'm not making fun of those things. I'm just saying I was in the South in a poor family, didn't know anything about this stuff, and this happened. So in a way, was good because I was able to experience it untrammeled by the preconceived ideas, some of which are good and some of which are not so good. So it was this beautiful, beautiful experience, and I literally experienced every level of this, from unbounded mind to the entirety of the infinity of cosmos. So that afterlife experience, which many people have had, a near-death experience, depends on how far it goes. I was out quite some time, and for some reason had the adventuresomeness to go as far as you could go in it. Until, it was a beautiful experience also with these 2 points of pure consciousness that were these divine avatar beings, and we sort of had a oneness experience and a lot of interesting non-verbal, non-visual packets of knowledge just sort of came to me. It was just very spontaneous, like a stream. And I don't know how long that lasted, at the end of which it was said to me, you need to either come with us now or go back. And I said, well, I mean, let's see, poverty, torture, illness, the earth, this celestial level of experience. But I had enough presence of mind to say, what is your will? Like thy will be done. And it was said very clearly, we'd like for you to go back. To which point I was very depressed and I was unhappy. But I did come back, otherwise I wouldn't be standing here, right? So I came back, back in my body. And during that experience, this is the part of it, the only part that was scary, is that I sort of awakened in consciousness in my body. I had sensory input. I could hear, I could see the maple tree outside my window in front of the street light, moving shadows, but I couldn't move. I was paralyzed. So this was this post-near-death brief paralysis, but I didn't understand it. I thought, oh great, now I'm a quadriplegic and I'm back. It turns out it took, after a little while, my neural connections were made and I was able to stand up and do whatever. Interestingly, this terrible injury, I have part of my left thigh missing. It's a big indented area where the muscle was eaten away. I never did get antibiotics or treatment. I spontaneously broke the fever and was healed the next day. So after this experience, it was a spontaneous healing also, part of this. I should have gone to see a doctor, but I didn't. Anyway, the universe took care of it. And here we are. So that experience, many thousands, millions of people have had near-death experience. There's a huge body of research on it, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. And there are different experiences people have, but that's something that is all within us, and we experience in different ways at the time that we leave our physical bodies here. Now this is where it gets interesting, because this is where most of this is pretty well understood historically from ancient teachings, the Vedas, the Sanskrit, the various sutras. This is pretty well understood and has been since the dawn of the human existence on this planet. What sounds new, and which is going to be a little more complex, is how these other dimensions and these finest aspects of the astral and thought and consciousness phase into the coarser aspects of astral light consciousness through the interface, what I call the gap, into linear 3D space-time matter, what is normally called the cosmos. Now, the cosmos, as we see it, and had it told to us by astronomers, is only this outer gray ring. Space, time, galaxies, this planet, the material world, etc. In reality, all of this, every one of these aspects is folded within and present in its fullness at every point of this, and vice versa. They're accessible. There's no barrier to entry except our thought. It's the constructs of belief. It's the constructs of thought. It's the education, miseducation, lack of education that makes us think it's all separate. You know, Native American people thought it was very strange when they first met people from the West, because they had this view of being separate from the sky, Father Sky, and Mother Earth, and all of this. And what we called primitive civilizations, most of these civilizations had an understanding. It was articulated differently perhaps from this, but you will find this is a universal understanding, whether it's the shamans or the aboriginals with Dreamtime, or the ancient Vedic teachers in the Himalayas, et cetera, and so on. So all of that is folded within every one of us and at every point of space-time, but also every intelligent being in the cosmos. This is going to get important right here. But we tend to be very narcissistic as a people, and this sort of self-referencing, this sort of anthropocentric projection, where we think we're the only thing in the universe, but also we're the only beings that would have these kinds of experiences. In reality, any sentient, intelligent life form anywhere in existence has all of this open to them and within them, and can be experienced, and eventually can be discovered scientifically, which is what we're on the verge of doing on our civilization with the science of consciousness studies. But then that gets extrapolated and developed and defined more and more and more into scientific systems. So, instead of having this with a radio frequency, this is on a thought frequency. You think to it, it turns on, it does something. We'll get into this in a moment. That's the interstellar level. All civilizations capable of going beyond what are normally described as the limits of space-time and the light barrier, speed of light, by definition, have mastered technologically, both in transportation systems as well as communication systems, trans-dimensional physics, which is where we're going to go in a moment. There's a purpose to all this. I'm trying to lay a foundation so you can understand the rest of this, and I hope I haven't lost you yet. There'll be time for questions. What I call the gap interface is very important to understand, and that is what is the relationship between these other dimensions, spirit world, the astral energy fields, the thought realms, consciousness, and 3D material objects, the cosmos, the planet, your body, yourself. How does remote healing work, where people put their awareness on someone and say a prayer, an intercessionary prayer, and it has an effect? Why does that work? It's because every point in space and time and every person has all of this cosmos holographically folded within. It's not a linear. This is written out linearly, but just forget the linearity, okay? It's not even non-linear, it's non-locality. So in physics, Einstein described the spooky effect, where the same particle would be in two places at once, that sort of thing. Entanglement, as it's been called. Some of you have heard about this. And physics is beginning to push into this non-locality, and it's where you begin to get the understanding that used to be relegated to the mystics into post-quantum, let's call it, physics. And the science of consciousness is the intersection of those two. Okay? Now, we have explored all this in various times in human history, but in ways that perhaps weren't intellectually or academically understood. They were more experiential. Now we're getting to the point where we can set up experimental models, like Dr. Radin's been doing and Dr. John did until his passing, of studying that and the effects of it. Otherwise, how is it that you could be sitting in a room, put your awareness on a random number generator, and affect the outcome? More zeros than ones or more ones than zeros. Interestingly, if you have two people who love each other or are united, the effect is exponential and not just linear. So there's this aspect of the being bonded in oneness, because the highest expression of love is oneness. This state. You can call it pure love. You can also conceive it as oneness, because if you love someone, you want to be with someone. It's that magnetic force. Very powerful, what we call love. Now there's sentimental love, there's interhuman love, but there's this, let's call it divine aspect of love, or this transcendent aspect of love, and that's very operative in the cosmos. Beautiful. This gap between this interplay between the three-dimensional cosmos and all of the consciousness, tonality, astral, and what I call near astral, things that are how is it that your body of light interfaces with your physical body, for example? Let's get on a granular, almost reductionist level of scientific inquiry here. You all have this experience of lucid dreaming. You have a body of light and this inner thoughts, essence, and consciousness, and unbounded this window into the unbounded field through your own portal, let's call it. Each of you is a stargate from that point of view, into infinity. Each and every individual is a stargate into this infinite realm, and to any point in space and time, which you can experience. So people say, oh, do I have to create a portal or a story? I said, you are a portal and a stargate. You need to know who you are, and once you realize who you are, you can access all of this here within. It's all there. It's all folded within. So this enfoldment is really important to understand, and yet there is a very specific scientific articulation, let's call it, connection between these realms that can be scientifically developed and, dare I use the word, routinized, made routine. Those are the interstellar civilizations. That's what they've already accomplished. If they hadn't been able to accomplish that, they couldn't go from one star system to another, one galaxy to another. So this is getting into the transdimensional interstellar, TDIS, level of the physics I want to get into today. Have I lost folks yet? You with me so far? Okay, good. So y'all ready for this? We just getting started, honey. Okay. I am a child of the South. Now, North Carolina. Interesting place to have developed on this planet. Oh boy. Now, when we entertain, how does all of this, let's call it as well as other dimensions, the spirit world, higher and lower dimensions of the astral, some would call, you go all the way from angelic, celestial, enlightened, to things that people might experience that are kind of boogamy and spooky, to things that are just prosaic, but still considered creepy, like the guy who died in my trauma one level. We had a big trauma place, and this doctors see a lot of stuff they don't talk about because we're not supposed to talk about it, because then you're not a scientist. What nonsense. Get over yourselves. All you academics, time to grow up. Childhood's in. You can quote me on that. But I was there. We had a man come in, and it was a multi-system trauma. He was murdered, and he had been intoxicated, and we couldn't save him. He passed away. And a few hours later, like at 3 or 4 in the morning, I was there in the central area. It had all these trauma rooms and stuff, and it was for 1 second quiet. No one was in there. And I'm there with the nurses and the unit clerk or secretary, and all of a sudden, the room in which he had passed away, there was all this racket. The cabinets flew open, IV bags were thrown on the floor, the IV pump was turned on, the EKG machine was turned up. This spirit of this guy that had passed away was in a rage, absolute. And that's been called poltergeist, these sort of weird phenomena. That's real. Now, don't be afraid of it. All I did, I went into this state. I just checked in here in all these realms, connected to that soul, connected him to that most great light, and it ended, and he went on his way. As you can do that very easily, not hard. See what I'm saying? You just do it like that. Of course, the nurses knew I'd done that, and they said, Dr. Greer's a warlock. I said, well, thank you. We had fun. Love those hillbilly nurses in North Carolina. We did have fun. So that experience, that's sort of one extreme experience of this interface where an astral body pushes in to this dimension. You see what I'm saying? But now imagine if let's say you're from a planet and a galaxy far, far away. Where's George Lucas's place? Not too far. and you're from a galaxy far, far away. And contrary to how the movies portray it, you don't get your phasers out and you don't speed up to. No, 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 no. You create a resonant field around whatever material object it is at a certain frequency and resonance, very high voltage. That thing looks like it's dematerialized and vanished. It's actually, let's call vibrationally or resonantly, and it's all electronics, high-end electronics, boom, goes into the gap and the near astral. And therefore, it no longer has mass. It no longer has the limits of the physical universe as it's been described, because it is operating in the near astral gap interface that allows this, whether it's poltergeist or near-death experience or you to be in a lucid dream, there's this interwovenness of that realm and other dimensions into the physical. And if you have scientifically elaborated and understood this to the point of very fine transdimensional physics and electromagnetic and electronic systems, you can go from point A to B in the cosmos almost that fast. It's not quite instantaneous because there's a coefficiency of drag, I call it, like you do with a car in a wind tunnel, as it skirts along the underbelly of the 3D cosmos. Does that make sense? So it may take a month to go 1,000,000 light years. A month corrected for Earth time. Does this make sense? A little bit? We'll get into this more in a moment. So then you have also communication systems. So I always tell this funny story of, I'm briefing the director of the CIA, and the cover story for that is a dinner party. So the wives are invited. This is 93, very chauvinistic, very politically incorrect, even in a red state. And but the wives were there to make it look like a legitimate dinner party, because there was the head of a think tank who has a board that the CIA director had been on, and me, and then the wives were invited at a dinner party at the private home of the think tank director, and of course I was the person presenting. So this was Bill Clinton, CIA director, R. James Woolsey, who tried to deny the meeting, and luckily I have the letter that proves him the liar. I always say in Washington, how do you know they're lying? Their lips are moving. If their lips are moving, they're lying. End of discussion. Now you can move on. So at any rate, how cynical. True, but so we have this meeting. Well, interestingly, we get into some really deep stuff very quickly. And it wasn't coming from the director of the CIA. He was more a policy person. He just didn't understand why the president and he were being denied access to these unacknowledged special access projects. In fact, he didn't know that USAPs existed, which is the whole documentary, Unacknowledged, which I'm sure most of you have seen. It's the #1 documentary in the last year on Netflix and iTunes and elsewhere. But yeah, in the whole world. Yeah, even though the mainstream media tried to blacklist it, it just took off. People are ready to hear this. So the CIA director's wife turns to me and says, how are they communicating across these vast distances of space? Because, we think we're all get out with these little gadgets. It's really rubbish. This is 1844 radio frequency. Let's not get carried away. All those of you who work in Silicon Valley, you got a lot of growing up to do. So we'll have a talk if there are any tech people here. Pull me aside, you can pick my brain, you can move to the next level quickly if you've got the cojones to do it. Now, that's really what it is, I'll tell you right now. It's courage and vision and integrity. Courage, vision, integrity, that's all you need. We have a new civilization here tomorrow. It's all here. So what's beautiful, though, is that she had the perspective to say, and she was the chief operating officer of the National Academy of Sciences, which is a very prestigious mainstream scientific entity, probably the most prestigious in the country, if not the world. And so she said, how are they communicating across these vast distances? Because at the speed of light of one of these things, let's say you're only 1,000 light years from here. And that's the distance of 1% of the way through our own galaxy, the Milky Way. The next closest galaxy is 2.5 million light years. So it would take 2.5 million years at the speed of light to get a signal to Andromeda, and 2.5 million years more for them to say, yeah, I got your signal, how you doing today? That's 5 million years. So any interstellar civilization, perforce, by definition, are required to be transdimensional if they're interstellar. Now, people have said, I remember I was here at the Noetic Sciences with Jacques Vallée. He said, well, these things aren't extraterrestrial, they're interdimensional. I'm going, oy, oy. It's like saying an orange is round, but it's not orange, and another guy arguing it's orange, but it's not round. It's orange and round, all right? All interstellar civilizations are transdimensional. All, they have to be. You cannot. So I explained this to the director of the CIA's wife. He was at this point, I think I lost him, because I moved off of policy and black budgets and unacknowledged special access projects and the agency that were lying to him and the president and all that stuff, into this, which seemed like the realm of the mystic, but it isn't. It's the realm of the cutting edge of science, the science of consciousness as well. And I said, look, they have two things operating. They have technology-assisted consciousness. So they have technology that assists their consciousness at remote viewing, precognition, and communication. But they also have consciousness that assists their technologies for the guidance and the direction of their spacecraft and things like this. So it's CAT and TAC. I wrote a paper about this in 1991. It went all through the CIA and aerospace upper end of Lockheed Skunk Works and McDonnell Douglas at the time, and Northrop Grumman. My uncle's old company was Northrop Grumman. And people went, how do you know this? I said, because I had that experience. I went there. And when I had my first contact experience, it was on that basis. So that's how I learned it. I learned it directly and experientially. The experience is the great teacher. So let's have that experience together. So the CIA director's wife is listening, and I said, because really the speed of light is just too damn slow. It's too slow for either communication or for transportation. And she looked at me and she says, you know, I knew it had to be something like that. She got it, bang, right off. And that was on December 13th, 1973. And that's when I said, I turned to my wife later, I said, that means the world is ready to hear this, even if it's not supposed to be spoken about in polite company. Because this is the chief operating officer of the National Academy of Sciences. Totally, this is what she was expecting the answer to be. You see how important that is? It's sort of like, there's sort of like milestones or litmus tests I look for in civilization to say, are we really ready for this or not? Or are we believing the PR of the cabal and the people who want to keep us stupid? Well, I don't want to stay stupid, and neither do you, so we can just forget about those control freaks. So, bye-bye. See ya. Wouldn't want to be ya. All right. There you go. That's it. All right, so now what you have is an understanding. You're beginning to see how if you are an interstellar civilization, it's way out in space, which, by the way, is also infinite and eternal. This is infinite and eternal, but so is the cosmos. The astrophysicists say that it's a limited size and we can only see so far, but that's just what I call the near universe. There's a pause, the vastness of empty space beyond what we can detect, and the continuation of universe and universe. Uni means one. You can't say there's another universe, because that subverts the meaning of universe. One. All this is in reality the universe. Now, our modern scientists and astrophysicists and who's that Tyson somebody, DeGrasse, or I don't know. Huh?
Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Yeah, Neil deGrasse Tyson and all those folks, they're limiting themselves to a very narrow bandwidth, not even all of this. All of this is omitted, which means that their operational paradigm is fatally flawed and very much just sort of more of a myth than the truth, scientifically even, because they will not acknowledge the primacy of the conscious quantum hologram that is the cosmos, and that is also each individual. Each individual has all of this folded within. I'll give you one more little fun story about the interface gap. which seems very foreign. It isn't. It's part of, look, if you have a astral projection experience or a lucid flying dream, somehow you integrate, it separates and then you integrate with your physical body, this body of light that has within it the causality, the thought essence of yourself, which is actually a tonality. Actually, everyone has our own tone, song. No two are alike. It's infinitely diverse. And then that has enfolded within it the entirety of this infinite consciousness field. All that. There's that wonderful saying, I think it's from the Persian tradition, thinkest thyself a puny form when within thee the universe is folded. It's a rhetorical question. You are not a puny thing. All of this is folded within each and every one of us and each and every extraterrestrial sentient being. So I had a man who was Lockheed Skunk Works guy. He approached me to ask, he really wanted to be a disclosure witness. Don Phillips, he's in the materials. And it was about a radar and an encounter case when he was in the military, and then he gone into work in the Lockheed Skunk Works, the super secret engineering division of Lockheed Martin. And he said to me, you know, the real reason I'm calling, it's a little bit of a transactional thing that happens with these nearly 1,000 military and intelligence witnesses that have come to me, because they want to share me information from them being in a classified project, but they want to pick my brain about this. So he said, back in those days, I was learning to, I was part of a group called the Rosicrucians, and I don't know what technique they use, but he was saying that he was being taught to astrally project. And his teacher, he was going, oh, I can't, he was intellectualizing and overthinking it too much. And his teacher said, look, you have the ability to do this. You know everything you need to know. Just do it. Just go ahead and do it. So he goes home, lays on his bed, does the technique, and just sort of with an impulse says, I can do this, and he does. So he goes up from his physical body and his body of light, goes through the roof, the ceiling of his house, up into the atmosphere, and sees a UFO, what would used to be called a UFO. Now it's called a UAP. It's all fake words. It was an extraterrestrial vehicle, ETV. NSA call them ETV. No such thing as a UAP or a UFO. They're not unidentified, they don't fly, it's a nonsense, and they're certainly not unexplained aerial phenomenon. That's ball lightning. Okay, so at any rate, these are all fake terms made to colonize people's thoughts, to make you think we don't know what it is when we do know what it is. Just remember, everything in the mainstream media is rubbish. So, total rubbish. You know, fake scientists, fake news, fake. Not what necessarily the president says, but it's fake. So that's going to be redacted. Redact. But let me just say, this guy didn't understand what happened because he understood consciousness and the astral and all of that. But when he went up to this craft and he slammed against it, and it moved the craft. It actually moved it, joggled it. And then, of course, he kind of popped inside, and there's ETs that they're standing at consoles because there's a bioelectric field, and that's how they're connecting consciousness into the system. And and they look at him like, my God, why don't you watch where you're going, you know? It was like this interstellar faux pas. And diplomatic or rude, just pop right in. Knock first. But he said it was embarrassing. But what he couldn't understand, he knew it was a totally real experience. He didn't understand why his astral body would have moved the craft. I said, because it had, quote unquote, pop culture term, dematerialized, and it was in the atmosphere, it wouldn't have been seen with the naked eye or a radar system. And it was in this near astral 3D gap, hovering. There could be one out here right now. You wouldn't see it, you wouldn't detect it. No radar system and no electronic system would detect it, except ones that are quite advanced, that are neutrino light astral systems that are highly classified. We'll get into this later. And so that experience taught him something, but he didn't know what it was. And I said, it's because when an interstellar ship has shifted out of 3D and has gone into, say, 4D, 5D, 6D, 8D, 10D. There are a lot of dimensions. It will be there, but it'll be there in a form, and if your physical astral body, I couldn't consider it physical, it's not metaphysical, it's still physical. Anything this side of unbounded pure consciousness is relative and has relativity of some type, may not be normal space-time attached to it. The density of your astral body and the density of that craft shifted into that frequency were the same, and that's why they touched. Conversely, you could take something, this you've heard of masters in doing this, take it a little bit out of spin angular momentum, this object, and make it go straight through my hand. It's not magic, it's physics. It's a physics that we need to begin to understand, because that's what these ET craft are doing. It's been relegated to the mystic. So here's the problem. We've overly mystified things that were at a stage for the last half century we should have all known. And that's part of the problem with secrecy. We're 50 to 100 years retarded, held back educationally from what we should know scientifically. I'm not talking about just in consciousness. Had there been disclosure of these facts back in the 40s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. But here we are, 2018, living like Neanderthals, burning oil in our cars to get up here. All right, when we haven't needed that since I was alive. And I ain't no spring chicken. I just turned 63 and I have 8 grandkids. So what you realize with this whole model is that all of this is folded within us. All of it is folded within us. But it also means it can be scientifically accessed if you have enough refined science and refined technological ability, where the science of consciousness and the studies of that, where the interface between consciousness, thought, so-called causality and astral energies begin to come together with physical systems. Now, interstellar civilizations, as well as highly classified projects in the United States and elsewhere, have that. And we'll get into that in a moment. But this paradigm you need to first own and comprehend before we can go to this next understanding. So is all this understood okay? We can move on?